Well, this is exciting.
Super exciting. I can't even handle it. And a long time in the making.
A long time in the making, though, our listeners may not know that.
That's
But
right.
for you and I, we have been swimming in these waters of change and potential change for a while.
Yes. And we're doing it. We are going to change the name of the Open Door Sisterhood podcast. And it's going to be awesome. We're so excited to tell you what it is. But before we do, we want to tell you why. Why are we changing? So let's go through 5 reasons the Open Door Sisterhood podcast name is changing. Krista,
top 5. Doing the
why
top
don't you
5 today.
Give us number 1.
Okay. Well, number 1 is we more specifically want to respond to your needs. We have heard we've been doing this a while now.
Oh my gosh.
We're just not, the newbies on the block around. And we feel like as we've gotten to know all of you better, and we've gotten to really identify what your needs are, what's resonating with you, what topics are really speaking, we actually feel like we have a good idea of where you're at. And we are excited to actually meet some of your needs a little more directly, specifically, and in a niche kind of way.
Yep. And we also think it's going to help attract new listeners, not because we care so much about numbers, but just, I think you'd agree, we love the things we talk about and we want other women to find the podcast. So we want to meet their needs well too, and we think it will. So when you send your friend this podcast you've been listening to for years with the new name, she may have a little more clarity around what we're going to be talking about. So that gets us to reason number 2.
Okay, give it to us.
We love the name, the Open Door Sisterhood. We love it. It brings up all kinds of warm, fuzzy feelings for all of us because it's about us, right? The sisterhood.
We are the sisterhood.
We are the sisterhood.
We always will be the sisterhood.
Always and forever. And yet, when somebody hears, oh, I listened to the Open Door Sisterhood podcast, that person you're telling, you may have experienced this because we've experienced it when we've told people the name of our podcast. They get this like confused look on their face because it doesn't say what it's about. It could be about a million things, right? It could be a travel podcast,
right?
For all we know, right? Someone used to refer to it. Who was it? Like the sisterhood of the traveling pants. Or something.
Yeah. No, I get that like at least every other week.
So we know what it's about. Our listeners know what it's about. But when people are searching, which is how we get new listeners often, although word of mouth is best, so tell all your friends, we want people to kind of have a sense of, oh, yeah, I know what this is about. And then also when we invite guests on, it just is going to provide a little more clarity. And clear is kind. So we are changing this name in big reason because we want people to have a better sense when they push play about what they're going to get.
Yeah. I mean, clarity is just a gift, right? And I think even as, the podcast has evolved over time, you and we have become way more clear about what we want to tackle, what we think our listeners need, and what's helpful and beneficial to people. And so the title, the name of the podcast that we're changing it to, when you hear it, which will happen in just a few minutes, when you hear it, you will say, yeah, that's what we've been doing. It will feel clear to you as it was so clear to us.
Yeah. Okay. Number 3, we kind of hinted at it just when we were talking about number 2, but number 3, Krista, give us reason number 3.
So like we said, the Open Door Sisterhood is awesome. And it's a little vague for a podcast, but it's great for retreats. And so what we're doing is we're just keeping our categories a little more clear. So the Open Door Sisterhood retreats are still going to be called the Open Door Sisterhood retreats, because that feels like a great name for retreats. And it's going to be a little clearer that we have a podcast that has a different name, that has a slightly different even vision to it, because it's not an in-person retreat. The podcast is a little different because it's different. But what we're excited about is that as we are working to actually expand our retreats, right now we've done one mastermind retreat a year that is usually with a specific group of people who are in a specific industry in the Christian world. And we're actually wanting to expand those and open those up and make it an all call for anyone who would want to come. And so as we are looking to kind of expand both the podcast and the retreats, it feels very logical to have them be a little bit separate in their names and be very specific. So the Open Door Sisterhood retreats, still there, still the umbrella of what we're working under. The podcast will be still under the Open Door Sisterhood umbrella. It will just be its own thing.
Yeah, just think of like the Open Door Sisterhood's like the parent company. It's not like the parent company. It is the parent company. Right. And the newly branded podcast is one of its brands. So that's just kind of from a strategy standpoint why we chose that. Okay. Reason number four. Reason number four. Krista said we've been doing this a long time, and it is time a little bit for a makeover. We needed to refresh, to change, because we're different people than we were when we started this podcast. And if you've been with us a long time, you've changed too. And that's okay. That's part of growth and change. We have a little bit more clarity, like we said earlier, about what we want to be talking about and what you want us to be talking about because of the feedback you've given us. We know which episodes are super popular. We want to bring you more of that. So we're just refreshing. It's just a new look, a new makeover, and it's time. It is time.
And you know what I love about it is that we get to celebrate when things evolve and grow and change. Like we get to celebrate that. In fact, we haven't talked about yet, but we're in party dresses today. We are in full out, legit party dresses. Alex is in sequence. Yeah. Everyone.
Head over to YouTube if you're listening to this on the podcast.
She's in actual sequence right now.
No, because it's time for a makeover. It's just time, right?
Yeah.
So, okay. So,
and it's fun that this is part of the celebration that I really feel that we have come to just appreciate and love, that as we grow and change, we get to celebrate that. And yes, maybe we're feeling some loss about some changes in our lives. And of course, that's true. I'm not minimizing that. But what I'm also saying is that God has something for us in every season, and we get to lean into that and embrace that. And we get to actually celebrate all that God is doing and will do in the future. And it's exciting and it's fun and it's new. And that's part of the spice of life. That's part of what makes life interesting and exciting and fun in every season. So we are living out exactly what we're hoping to encourage all of you to do, that as we all change and grow, to give each other permission to do that and to celebrate it together.
Okay, Krista, why don't you give us reason number 5 on why we are changing the name?
Number 5, we want to offer new tools, and we have been moving in that direction for a long time. But as you can tell by our series, I think if you've been listening and following, and you may not have thought about it because we don't expect you to, but we have been kind of working toward some specific ways of dealing with these new changes in life or these transitions in life. And we're just excited to package that under the new podcast in some new and interesting ways. Again, breathing creativity into what we're doing now. Because, when we started the podcast years ago, I don't know, what are we on? 5 years? 5
At
years?
least. Mm-hmm.
Um, that was a creative start, and we were forming it, and that was a creative work. But after a while, if you don't keep being creative, then it just becomes the norm over and over and over again, right? And so this is a way for us to infuse new creativity and life into the podcast, which feels super exciting and fun.
Yes, it does. And we have been kind of hinting at the direction. We've tried out some names. We'll talk about it later. Tried out some names that we thought could be potential names in our series in the last year. And they just didn't quite hit right. And this one did. And in fact, it did really fast. And so we're super excited about it. We can talk about that in a minute. But I think it's time. I think it's time for us to tell them the name. So Krista, I want you to be the one. Yeah, I'm going to do the drum roll.
Okay, everybody do it with us. Drum roll in your car, on your makeup counter, in the kitchen, wherever you are, do the drum roll.
Okay, Krista, tell us the new name of the podcast.
Okay, the new name is Women, Our Time to Rise.
Our time to rise.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is our time. So, what can you expect from our time to rise? Well, you can expect that some things are going to stay the same and some things are going to change, because that's how life works, right? That some things stay the same and some things change, and we have to respond to those changes. But
let's talk about our time to rise. Why is this our time to rise? And what is it that we are saying with this name?
Well, I think we want to make it clear that we want to give you tools to rise to the occasion. And often that involves changing circumstances that are new and unexpected, because we believe that we can. We believe you can. And we're doing this together. That's why we're saying our time to rise, because it's still the sisterhood. We're still doing this in community. We are rising together, and it's for right now. I mean, since we've chosen this name, I can't tell you how many mornings I have woken up and thought, okay, today is my time to rise in whatever area
fill in the blank
is feeling challenging. And it could be a conversation, a relationship, a circumstance, everything from our changing bodies to our changing families to the changing economy. We are God's women, and we have the power of the Holy Spirit in us to meet the moment. Now, is it always going to look like we want it to? Probably not, but we've all come to terms with that, right? So what does it mean to rise in this? And I'm just super excited about it, because I feel like it encapsulates the challenge we want to give to each other, to the sisterhood, and our call to action for all of us to step into life fully as it's changing. And let's be honest, the world is changing, right? And
yes,
we hear from you all the time, our listeners. I don't know how to respond to X issue or to this situation. 20 years ago, I wouldn't have had to have dealt with this, but now we do. So we're going to be talking about that too. How do we live as women of faith in a world that's changing? And even yesterday, I left Krista a message about a specific situation that I was like, this is new. It's challenging. I feel like God's put me here. And you gave me good words in saying, aren't we fortunate that we get to live right now and live into these challenges that are unique to this time? And I thought, okay, it's our time to rise. It's my time to rise in this moment. So that's why we like this name. Anything you want to add on that, Krista?
Yeah, I think just really just piggybacking on what you're saying, that I think sometimes we do wish for things to be different. And we resist narratives. We
Yes.
resist the cultural norms. We resist. And instead, what if, let's talk about a mindset shift. What if instead we said to ourselves, not only was I born for this moment because God put me in this generation and this time, I wasn't born 40 years ago. Well, you know what I'm saying. Maybe you were born 40 years ago.
I was born 48 years ago.
Let's say
You weren't
like
living out your life as an adult 48 years ago.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I wasn't born for that time. I'm
Mhm.
actually born for this time. And so because of that, God has a purpose and a plan, a redemptive plan for me to be a part of his story in the world. And I'm going to rise to this moment. I may be struggling with this moment, but I'm going to rise to it and I'm not going to be afraid of it. I'm going to have courage. I'm going to find strength in God to do it. I'm going to stay flexible and I'm going to stay faithful. And I'm not going to let it, whatever it is, I am not going to let it steal my joy and my hope. And, this is something that we've always talked about and we will continue talking about. We are hope bearers in the world. And may we always be. And this call to rise just is so significant to me because it's a rise to that hope in the world, whatever the situation is. And I feel like it just gives us such a beautiful handhold of this is our time to rise in this moment for this reason. And you know what? It's not all going to be serious. I mean, we're going to, talk about some fun as we do in the Open Door Sisterhood. We're going to talk about some light and fun things too, but we're also going to talk about the deep and hard. And we're going to do both. And we're going to talk about what it looks like to rise in this moment in both.
Yeah. So let's talk about what's going to stay the same. And I think you hinted at it, that a lot of the topics, let's be honest, a lot of the topics that we have covered over the last 5 years are essentially this, that we are responding to pain points in our life. We are just going to be, so that's not going to change. What is going to change is maybe the call to action is going to be a little more intentional. We are going to focus in on some practical things because when we talk about, say, rising in, I don't know, conflict, we can talk about these are some practical steps we can do because we want to give you tools in the how, not just in the why, but in the how to rise. So we say at the sisterhood that we take that next step, do that hard thing to be world changers for good. We're still going to be saying that because that's still true. It's just going to have a little more laser focus.
Yeah. And I think as we look at this idea of, as Alex and I have been, talking through this for a long time. I mean, one of the things that you and I talk about is this idea of, shouldn't we know how to do this yet? This idea of like, I'm an adult and shouldn't I know how this should go and what I should be doing? And yet how many times do we say, wow, I'm kind of doing this for the first time, or I don't totally know what I'm doing here. And it's a way for us to really equip each other as we are walking this journey together and saying, yes, you can. You're going to rise in this moment, and we're going to help you by equipping you in these different ways. And that just feels so good to be on this journey in that way together, that we're going to keep learning and we're going to keep growing and we're going to keep providing tools, hopefully in a more specific way that really gives you some practical help and say, you don't have to do this alone. We're walking together.
And another thing we hear often is how you trust us. And we're not changing. We're not going anywhere. It's still going to be the two of us and you, the sisterhood. So that element is going to be the same. So In some ways, you may not notice the change. We think you might because of the way we package things, but the essence of who we are is not changing. And
Mhm.
the essence of many of the topics we cover will not change. Krista, I would love to share with our audience a few of the names that we had considered,
Okay.
and they may recognize them because we tested them out
Mhm.
as series names in the
Mhm.
last year.
Which was helpful.
Yeah, it was
So,
helpful.
so let's start with the biggie.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very popular series.
It
Midlife
was.
is no joke.
Mm-hmm.
We considered naming the podcast that.
Yeah. And we liked it because it was specific to a certain stage of life, which we know we're in, and many of you listening are in, but it also was restrictive to that stage of life. We know some of you are a little younger. Some of you might not think you're in midlife anymore. We liked that it was a little bit playful, no joke. I mean, we want to talk about important things, but we also want to have some fun. But it almost felt too much like we'd be talking about menopause the whole time. And so we didn't want people to think it was a menopause podcast because, yeah, that, and when we asked people, what would you expect before we released the topics for that series? What would you expect from this series titled this? It was a lot around changing bodies and we are going to talk about, we're going to keep talking about that, but it's not going to be all we're talking about.
Right. Right. So we just felt it was a little too pigeonholed
Mhm.
and maybe actually that people could misinterpret. I mean, if the whole idea is to have people know what we're talking about in that situation, you read that title and you're like, they're talking about the body, they're talking about
Mhm.
menopause. We just didn't want that to be the focus. Okay, let's talk about the second one. We really camped on the second one. I mean, that the midlife was no joke was for a little while, but then we
Mhm.
really camped and we almost named the podcast this one. So what's that one?
Yeah, like almost. So that one is Pivot Forward. So if
Mhm.
you've been listening recently to the podcast, we have talked some about what it means to pivot forward. Again, it captured that sense of responding to change, being nimble. We liked that, the whole pivot thing, while also still moving intentionally in the direction you want to go. That was the forward. Um, it did sound a little cold. And
Mhm.
and the sisterhood element was missing from it.
Mhm.
And we do know that you all love the sisterhood. So we wanted to keep something that still felt that community, we're in this together.
And we love the sisterhood. I mean, we will
Yes.
forever and always love the sisterhood.
Right. So anyway, it just felt like it was a little bit corporate, a little bit cold, and didn't capture the community aspect that we want to continue to have.
Mhm. Yeah. And so then when our time to rise came forward, we're like, this is it. And what's so crazy is that we've been thinking about this for so long. And we made that decision in an hour, maybe 45 minutes. Once we hit on that, we were like, that's it. And it was like done. And that's literally after debating and going back and forth and for hours over the
Yeah.
past year. I mean,
Yeah. I was sitting in the bleachers in a lacrosse game when
mhm.
we were communicating about this, because I just want you to know, like, our lives mirror your lives.
Right.
We make
Right.
decisions in bleachers. Okay, people. And but it just, when you know, right? But
Mhm.
the good thing was all of the work we had done up to that point when we had been considering other names was really honing in on what do we want to be talking about and what do we want to be calling people to. And
Mhm.
this just feels like it captures it the best.
It does. It captures the spirit of the sisterhood. It captures the spirit of the call. And we've already said that, but next step, take that next step, do that hard thing, be a world changer for good, right where you are. Like it really captures the call of the sisterhood that we've had. We're just naming it differently, and it feels so inspiring and right. This is our
Mhm.
time to rise, women. And it really
Mhm.
is. Like, I could not feel more passionate about this statement. Like, it is our time to rise.
Mhm.
And the more we shrink and back away and hide from challenges, changes, the world, the less God's peace and love and kindness and joy is in the world. We are not called to shrink. We are actually called to be that lamp on a hill, that light on a hill. We're to give salt and light to the world. And so I just feel so excited about it. Like, it just lights me up to talk about it, because this is the call. This is the call. And let's, I think about that proverb all the time. If you falter in times of trouble, how small is your strength? And we don't want to be that. We want to be those people who actually rise in strength to the challenge.
Yep. And it is our time, because I do think of the greater world, and there's so much heartache. It's as if the
Mhm.
world is aching, and we are not the
Mhm.
world's savior, but
No,
God is. And so it is our responsibility
mm,
to respond to the world's pain in a way that he is uniquely calling each one of us to do, which is why we talk about being world changers for good right where we are.
mm,
And we are women who are in positions of influence. And for most of us, we have influence in our homes, some in the workplace, all of us in our communities.
mm.
And this is a bigger call that we can respond to together. And it's going to look different for each of us, because we're all world changers for good in different places
Right.
and with different skill sets and different personalities and different life stages. But the principles that we bring forward in the next months and years of the podcast, it will be applicable to your life. And we can't wait. We can't wait to jump in. So I would say, if there is something you want to hear about from us, like if you think, yes, I need some practical help or some inspiration to rise in this area, we are always open to suggestions and finding great content and great guests that might be part of that. So that's an open invitation to send us a DM anytime to say, could you guys do an episode on this? Now, I can't promise that we will, because sometimes we're like, yeah, that's a great question. I don't know who can answer that. But sometimes it has inspired us to find really great guests.
Well, and I also encourage people to share pictures of them rising. I mean, the other day, Alex sent me a picture and I said, look at that girl right there. Look at that woman right there. She is rising. She is rising. And so, we can also share with each other moments when we're rising, and just take a picture of yourself wherever it is. And we want to be a part of that with you. Like, we want to see you rising in the world. And it could be the smallest step. It could be that you've been in bed for days because you're not feeling great about how things are going. And you decide to get out and go on a run or go on a long walk. And you're like, this is my rising today. We want to see that, right? It
Mhm.
could be whatever it is. I mean, this is like, that's why it's so personal, because you rising is going to be so individual to the day, to your life and your situation. But share it with us, because we'll be excited with you.
Yeah, your feet planted on the ground wherever you are
Mhm.
is you being a world changer for good right where you are. So that's what we want to see. We want to see, where in the world are you? And it could just be your feet. I'm standing, I'm rising to this occasion. And we all know that sometimes that's going to be an external factor. Like, people will be able to see, oh, she's doing X, Y, and Z about this, whatever it is. But for many of us, the rising is an internal element too. It's a
Mhm.
both and that we often have to do the internal first to say, I believe that God is going to equip me to meet this occasion right now. And I'm going to literally stand up as a symbol to myself and to God that I am rising with his strength, in his strength for now.
So good. Okay. Well, that's the new name, everyone. It's our time to rise, and we invite you to rise with us. Thanks for being with us today.
Bye.